Hi everyone, it is 2023 and it's time for you to make that novel that you've been dreaming about writing a reality. So in this video, we're going to talk about 5 important things you need to consider when you're plotting your novel. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lisa Oliver. I am a self-published author and have been supporting myself from my writing for the past 9 years. Well, it'll be 9 years next month. And I am really thrilled because I want to use this channel to help you to do the same. So let's dive into it, because if you want to find out about me, there's heaps of links in the description below, and all you need to do is Google Lisa Oliver author and you'll find me. But anyway, you're plotting your novel. Now, I don't do that, so this needs to come with a bit of a disclaimer. I am what's called a pantser. I sit down, I find pictures of my characters, and I sit down and I get an idea for an opening scene and I start writing. That is how I start my books. And that's how I've started all of my books. I am close to hitting 100 books now in 9 years. And it's, so as you can see, it's a system that works for me, but it doesn't work for everybody. Some people are a lot more comfortable when they plot things out and they know where their story is going to go, and it helps keep them, keep them in line in terms of pacing and everything else. So the first thing that you've got to consider when plotting your novel is, who are the characters? Who is the main character or characters that are going to drive your plot forward? Because you can't have a plot without characters. It is the characters and how they respond to conflicts, goals, and everything else that will drive and propel your plot forward. If you don't have characters, then you don't really have a story. So who are your main characters? You need at least one. If you're writing a romance, you need a minimum of 2. But you need a main character in particular who is going to propel your story forward. It is their motivations, their desires, their goals, their personalities, their everything that the whole rest of the plot is going to center around. And when you've worked that out, I need to put a little advisory note in here. Some people have loads of characters, and that does work for some kinds of books. But you want to make sure when you're working on your character development that you don't overload your plot with different characters, because the reader can get confused. Relationships between characters can get confusing. And if you have a confused reader, then you have a reader that probably closes the book halfway through. As you want them to read all the way to the end, limit the number of characters that are applicable to your story. That said, you do need supporting characters, and that is the second important thing to consider when you're plotting your novel. Supporting characters are really awesome devices that can be used, like in particular if your hero or heroine has to discuss something, maybe they want to offload, maybe they want to vent. It makes more sense in a novel to do that to another person instead of the wall, or maybe their cat. That could work. But most stories have secondary characters. And unless you're doing the survival on a desert island thing, you might want to think about at least having a best friend, a sidekick. You could even have, another secondary character is actually somebody who is, the main character's nemesis. It might be the person he's always already trying to be better than. I had an interesting chat with my grandson the other day, and he was telling me about, he'd got his end of year thingies and he'd come second in everything. It was really awesome. He did so well in his class and I was so proud of him. But it was the same boy who came first in everything. And I said, so how are you going to go into 2023? And he says, that's my goal. He said, that guy is my nemesis. My goal is to beat him. And you find that in plots too. You know, maybe you're doing a superhero story and you've got some guy who's not the most superhero hero, but maybe there's somebody else there that he wants to become, or he wants to achieve, or he wants to do better than. That can be a motivation for a plot just on its own. But so your secondary characters are important, both the good ones and the nemesis. Doesn't matter which, but they're a second important part of your novel. The third part, and perhaps this is equally as important as secondary characters, perhaps even more so, but the third part is you have to have a conflict. Now, it doesn't have to be an external conflict. The world does not have to end in every story you write, okay? But you have to have some sort of conflict so that your character, your main character, has a chance to grow, to develop and grow. So, as I say, it doesn't have to be world ending, but it does have to be something. I had a situation in my Helios and Bruno story where Bruno absolutely did not want to have a mate. He definitely didn't want to be a mate to a god, but he didn't know why. The main conflict in that story actually came from his PTSD, and it's quite common now to see in stories where the conflict isn't necessarily an external one. It can be an internal one, and how your main character overcomes that through whatever means, through the action in your plot. But there does need to be a conflict, because all stories are written pretty much in waves. You know, they build up to a subplot and then they go down, and then they build up and they go down, and then you've got the main conflict, depending on how long your story is. Then you've got a main climax, and this is the overriding climax. This is where the main character comes out on top, and then you've got the aftermath, and that is what the readers are looking for. But you need that conflict. There needs to be a conflict or a goal that is being thwarted by a conflict. But there has to be some reason for why your characters are doing the things that they do. So that is an important point to think about when you're laying out your plot. Another thing that is really important, number 4, is the setting of your story. Now, in some fantasy stories, the world building on its own can be almost like a character in itself, especially if it's a fantasy world that we know nothing about. If it doesn't have any passing resemblance to our world, then you're going to want to describe and show through the characters' interaction with that world the differences, and help to build up the reader's picture of what that world is like. Now, recently, and the reason why I know this is an important thing, is recently I branched out. I know, shock horror, but I actually branched out from writing my typical shifter and vampire stories, which I adore. And I decided to write an arranged marriage story set on a different world. Because up until then, I had only ever written stories that were written pretty much in this world. You know, it was pretty much this world without some of the hassles that we have. But yeah, so this was my first time in writing a different world. And my world that I created was purely fictional. And it was like, it had hints of steampunk, it had hints of magic and fantasy, and it was quite old worldy. And I wanted it that way specifically. But I did get negative comments in reviews. You know, they loved the characters, they loved the story, but they didn't understand enough of the world because I didn't show them enough through what my characters were doing. So when I came to write book 2 in that world, I made a point of trying to describe things more and tried to explain more like how the process of magic actually came from crystals that King Minton from Marancore, his people used to mine it. So theirs was a very magical country in this world. But I explained more. There is, and I'm currently writing book 3 in this world, and I'm again where there are differences, where I haven't written the same things as in Don't Judge a Prince by His Undergarments, and this particular one I'm layering different things again, just adding to the understanding of that world, because the world itself becomes a character. Now, there does have to be a warning here, though, because what I have seen many new authors do is they feel there's so much about their world because they've invested months and years in planning their fantasy world. They've probably got Pinterest boards, and they've got motivation boards, and they've got pictures and huge screeds about what the world is about and every aspect of that world, and they want to put it all in their novel. They want to use it. But the problem is unless the world itself is an active character, readers are going to be more interested in what the characters are doing on that world, not about that world itself. So when you're plotting, keep that in mind. Definitely educate the reader about your world as the character moves through it. But don't spend the first 2 chapters of your book info dumping about the world. Paint brush strokes. Let them imagine the bigger picture. And then that way you are keeping your story moving. And finally, and I know it sounds really weird, but this is actually a really important part of plotting your novel. Your story has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And you might be thinking, but Lisa, that's self-explanatory. You start at the beginning, it's got a middle, and then you end. But those aspects are actually a really important part of plotting. Your beginning is fine. You're all excited and everything else, and you start writing your book and everything goes really well. But then a lot of people tend to skip over the middle, or they make their middle too long and it becomes soggy and gets bogged down. And then, because they think, oh my God, I've just had enough of writing of this book, and they rush the ending. So when I was drawing that sort of sine wave curve, is it a sine wave? I don't know. Somebody will tell me in the comments that I've got it wrong. But that curvy thing, that's what I mean. And you need to pace your plot, pace your book, so that, you're not having all the action happen at the end of the book. You want a couple of little smaller subplot thingies in there that they resolve, and then that moves them on to the next point, and then do that, and then you've got your climax scene. But the other thing is look at it in terms of chunks. If you have a 60,000 word book, and that's, I realize, for some, particularly fantasy writers, that can be quite short, but if you have a 60,000 word book, then you want 20,000 words, the first 20,000 words, to ease them into, to basically lay things out, have the first interactions between characters and everything going on, throw your readers in the story, get them interested and what have you. And then this is where you find out where your conflict and everything is. And then you've got this bit in the middle, because maybe they've worked out what they need to do, but in the middle is when they actually start to do these things, and they have, maybe they get thwarted at point 1, and then they go to point 2, and then they try point 3, and then it all builds up, so that the last 20,000 words, the last third of your book, is building up to that climax, writing the climatic scene, not in 2 pages, but actually, you've built your reader up to this all this time. So you can't just write that off in 2 paragraphs and call it done. And then, just because the climax is over and the hero has prevailed, or the heroine, or whatever has prevailed, then you've got to have that gradual down. You can't just cut the book off and say, bye. because that's not how it's done. The reader wants to know what happens next. Did everybody live happily ever after? Were they not intended to? Did the entire world actually end? And in which case, what's left? So when you're plotting your story, maybe work out in advance roughly how many words you think what length of book you'd be comfortable writing. And then sort of like, when you start jotting your plot points down, start making a little notation of roughly what word count you'll be at when you reach those different stages, so that the book is well paced. If you read any good novel, there is a certain pace to it. And it doesn't all necessarily go like that in regular waves. I have seen some authors and they really slap out the blooming action scenes right at the beginning. They hook you in, they drab you in quite literally by the scruff of your neck, and you start reading. But you also need lull periods in every story, because you can't you'll exhaust your reader if you just go from one hotspot situation to another. So that pacing, the highs have their impacts because of the lows that follow. So that relaxed time that follows. So when you're plotting your story, think about the pacing. Think about how many subplots you're going to have. Think about how many different little arcs you're going to have that all build to this huge climax that you're coming to at the end. And work out roughly, if it helps you, work out roughly how many words you need to do this, the beginning, your middle, and your end. And if you think in terms of thirds, you shouldn't go too far wrong. But that's what I've sort of got for you today. It's just basically, your 5 important things to consider when plotting your novel. You need to consider your main character. You need to consider your supporting characters. You need to have a main conflict and what those conflicts and goals are, because they are what motivating your characters. You need to think about the setting for your novel and where it's going to be, where and how, because all of those things will also influence how your main characters behave. And finally, you need to think about pacing. You need to think about laying out your book so it has a very clear beginning, middle, and end. And that way, when your readers come to the end of your freshly written book, they'll be able to just go, yeah, thumbs up. That was good. And that's the sort of reaction you want when your reader has finished reading your story. If you have any questions at all, please pop them down in the comments below. I am going to try and make for some more helpful content when it comes to writing your book, self-publishing your book, and marketing your book in 2023, because by 2024, I want for you to be sitting in a spot like I am, where you're supported by the income that you make as being a self-published author. So if that's something you think you might be interested in, please hit the like and subscribe button. Comment and I will reply, I promise you that. And in the meantime, check out my links below and hug the ones you love. Until next time, bye.